I want you to picture a scenario. It's a universal human experience, and honestly, when you stop to really think about it, it's a little absurd.
Oh, I think I know where you're going with this.
You probably do.
Mhm.
You're sitting on a crinkly paper in a doctor's office. Maybe your arm is throbbing or your stomach is doing backflips,
Mhm.
and the doctor walks in, looks at you, and asks that classic question.
On a scale of 1 to 10, how much does it hurt?
Exactly. How much does it hurt?
It is the classic calibration error in medicine. And honestly, from a scientific perspective, it is a frustratingly terrible question.
Right, because it's impossible to answer accurately. I mean, my 5 might be your 9.
Exactly.
Or maybe I grew up in a household where you just don't complain, so I say I'm at a 2 when I'm actually seeing stars.
Uh-huh.
Or maybe I'm super dramatic and a paper cut is a 10. It's just completely subjective.
It is entirely subjective. And that subjectivity is a massive bottleneck in modern medicine. But let's raise the stakes a little bit here. Imagine you can't speak.
Oh, wow.
Imagine you are nonverbal or you have advanced dementia. You literally cannot answer that 1 to 10 question. How does the doctor know if you're suffering?
That is a terrifying thought. And that is exactly what we are getting into today. We are exploring the mission to measure the unmeasurable. We're doing a deep dive into biosignals, specifically how the body basically screams in pain, even when the face is trying to hide it, or when a person literally can't say a word.
We have a really fascinating stack of research today, largely centering on work by researchers Elizabeth B. Torres and Mona El Said. We're pulling from a paper in Frontiers regarding facial micromovements and a really dense but fascinating chapter from Intech Open exploring cardiac responses to distress.
And just to give you a roadmap of where we're going with this, because we are going to get into some serious physiology today, we are going to talk about micro movements, which sounds like some kind of spy technique.
It really does.
We're going to break down the fight or flight response in a way you probably haven't heard before. And we are going to uncover a genuinely groundbreaking finding about how the heart and the face synchronize when you're in pain.
It's a finding that might completely change how we understand autism and behavioral issues too, but we'll get to that.
We will definitely get to that. Okay, let's unpack this first part. To find these invisible signals, these researchers couldn't just ask people, how do you feel? They had to run a controlled experiment. They needed hard data.
Right. So they recruited 45 participants, and they needed to induce pain. But obviously, they had to do it ethically and consistently across the board. They couldn't just go around pinching people or, waiting for someone to stub their toe.
So they didn't use needles or anything like that?
No, no needles. They used what's called a submaximal effort tourniquet test.
Which is a very sterile scientific way of saying they put a blood pressure cuff on your arm.
Right, on the non-dominant arm. And they inflated it to 200 millimeters of mercury.
200?
Yes. And then, importantly, they just left it there.
Ouch. Yeah, that's high.
If you've ever had your blood pressure taken, you know that really tight squeeze at the very top of the test. Now imagine that squeeze doesn't let go. It creates this lingering, deep, throbbing pressure. It's ischemic pain.
So it's not sharp.
No, it's not sharp like a needle prick. It's an ache that slowly just takes over your entire awareness.
Okay, so you're sitting there with this throbbing arm. But the researchers didn't just let the participants sit there feeling sorry for themselves, right? They made them do work.
This is a crucial part of the study design. They wanted to see how pain affects different types of brain and body activities. So they had 4 specific tasks. First, simply resting.
Which sounds easy, but try sitting perfectly still when your arm feels like it's being completely crushed.
Precisely. It's actually much harder than it sounds because you have to inhibit your natural urge to move or wiggle around to relieve the discomfort.
Right.
Then they had a drawing task. Participants had to connect dots, letters, and numbers on a page. This tests cognitive load because you have to think about the order while you're in pain.
Then there was a pointing task, reaching for a target on a screen. And finally, the grooved peg task.
Yes, and this one is really important for the results later. You have to pick up a little keyed peg, rotate it in your fingers so it matches a specifically shaped hole, and insert it. This requires what we call haptic feedback.
Haptic meaning touch.
Exactly, your sense of touch and physical manipulation.
So while these poor folks are connecting dots and fiddling with pegs, the researchers are watching them like hawks, but not with their own eyes.
No, the naked eye isn't good enough for this kind of measurement. They used wearable sensors, specifically a biostamp on the chest to measure the electrical activity of the heart, the ECG. And they used high-resolution webcams focused entirely on the face to track movement.
Okay, so they had the data. Let's look at the heart first. I think we all know that when you're stressed or in pain, your heart beats faster. Was that the big discovery?
That's sort of the WebMD version of the story. The reality is much more nuanced. They weren't just looking at heart rate, they were looking at heart rate variability, or HRV, specifically the interbeat interval.
We've touched on HRV in previous deep dives, but give us a quick refresher. Why is variability a good thing?
Think of a healthy heart not like a metronome, but more like a jazz drummer.
A jazz drummer, I like that.
It's responsive. If you stand up, it speeds up slightly. If you exhale, it slows down. That variability between the beats is a sign that your nervous system is listening to the environment. It's adaptable.
And when we talk about the nervous system, we're balancing two sides, right? Like a seesaw.
Exactly. You have the autonomic nervous system. On one side, the sympathetic nervous system, that's the fight or flight response, the gas pedal. In the data, this shows up as low frequency, or LF power.
The gas pedal, okay.
On the other side is the parasympathetic nervous system, which is the rest and digest side, the brake. And this shows up as high frequency.
So in a healthy, relaxed person, the brake is basically on.
Yes, specifically via the vagus nerve. We call it vagal tone. It keeps the heart rhythm flexible and variable. But when that pain cuff kicked in during the study, what do you think happened?
The brake releases and the gas pedal slams down.
Exactly. The parasympathetic tone dropped and the sympathetic gas pedal took over.
So the heart rate goes up, but the variability goes down.
Well, the quality of the variability changes completely. The rhythm becomes highly erratic. The researchers use something called Poincaré plots to visualize this.
Can you describe that for the listener who obviously can't see the charts right now?
Sure. Imagine plotting every heartbeat on a graph against the previous heartbeat. When you're relaxed, the dots form a nice, tight, cigar-shaped cloud. It's very organized.
Right, so a tight cloud means I'm chill.
Right. But when you're in pain, that cloud practically explodes. The dots scatter everywhere. The study measures this scatter using a metric called SD2.
SD2. So if my SD2 is high, my heart is basically freaking out.
Essentially, yes. The scatter, or the length of that cloud, increases significantly with pain. The signal becomes noisy. The heart isn't just beating fast, it's beating with a chaotic, erratic rhythm, because the pain is overwhelming the system's ability to regulate itself.
Noisy is a really evocative way to put it. It's almost like static on a radio line. The signal just isn't clean anymore.
That is exactly the metaphor the researchers rely on. The signal-to-noise ratio collapses. The heart is struggling to maintain a rhythm against the flood of pain signals coming from that arm.
Okay, so the heart is screaming in chaos. That makes total sense. But here is where it gets really interesting for me. The face.
Yes, the face is where this research really breaks new ground.
Because usually, if I'm in pain, I grimace, I frown, I grit my teeth. But that's voluntary, right? Or at least those are big, obvious movements.
Correct. Those are macro movements, and people can learn to suppress those. Having a poker face is a real thing. You can train yourself not to frown when you're hurt. But this study wasn't looking for frowns. They mapped the face using 68 distinct grid points, specifically focusing on the regions controlled by the trigeminal nerve.
The trigeminal nerve, that divides into three parts, doesn't it?
Yes. You have V1, the ophthalmic region, which is your eyes and forehead. V2, the maxillary, covering the cheeks and nose. And V3, the mandibular, which is your jaw.
And what exactly were they looking for on those points, if not expressions?
They were looking for micro-movement spikes, or MMS. These are involuntary subthreshold fluctuations in the speed of the skin's movement. We were talking about tiny twitches and shifts that happen in milliseconds.
Too fast to see.
Way too fast for the naked eye to consciously register.
So even if I'm sitting there trying to look tough, keeping a totally straight face, my skin is, what, vibrating?
In a way, yes. It's twitching with noise. And the researchers actually found a mathematical pattern to this vibration. They fit the data to something called the gamma family of probability distributions.
Okay, hold on. Gamma probability distribution. That sounds like the part of a college lecture where I start doodling in my notebook. Why does that matter to us?
I promise it matters. Think of it this way. In a normal, healthy state, your facial micromovements are predictable. They follow a standard bell curve. But when you introduce pain, the movements shift. The distribution becomes what we call heavy-tailed.
Heavy-tailed. Does that mean the extreme events happen more often?
Exactly. The randomness increases. There's a scaling power law here. As the noise-to-signal ratio increases, the randomness of the twitches increases, the noise in the face spikes. And crucially, they found that as the heart's rhythm became noisy and erratic due to the pain cuff, the face mirrored that noise mathematically.
the face became a proxy for the heart's distress.
Exactly, and specifically, the V1 region around the eyes was the most sensitive. The chaos in the heart rhythm was mathematically reflected in the chaos of the micro movements around the eyes.
That is wild. It's like the body acts as a pressure cooker. The noise can't be contained in the chest. It literally leaks out through the face.
Leaks out, or is actively driven out. And this brings us to a really advanced concept they talk about called transfer entropy.
Which sounds entirely like something from a sci-fi movie. Engage the transfer entropy drive.
It does sound like that, but it's actually a statistical method for measuring information flow. It basically asks, does knowing the past activity of System A help me predict the current activity of System B? In this case, does knowing what the heart just did help us predict what the face is doing right now?
And the answer was yes.
A resounding yes. They found a causal link. The distress in the autonomic nervous system, the heart drives the dysregulation in the face. They are locked in a loop of physiological distress. The heart screams, and milliseconds later, the face twitches in response.
Now, you mentioned earlier that the task they were doing mattered. This wasn't the same across the board for all 4 tasks.
Right, this was one of the most practical findings. Remember the grooved peg task, where they had to fit the keyed peg into the hole?
The one that needs the haptic, the touch feedback.
Yes. That task showed the strongest correlation between heart noise and face noise.
Why that one? Why not the drawing or the pointing?
Because pain directly interferes with sensory processing. When you are in pain, your nervous system is flooded with noise. Trying to perform a task that requires delicate haptic feedback, feeling the groove, rotating the peg, is incredibly difficult because the pain signal is essentially jamming the touch signal.
It's like trying to listen to a whisper in a crowded nightclub.
Perfect analogy. The system gets overwhelmed and the noise spikes even higher. But the drawing task was completely different.
How so?
The drawing task has a high cognitive load. You have to actively think, okay, 1 connects to A, 2 connects to B. That mental effort actually acted as a distractor. The brain was so busy processing the logic that it temporarily altered the noise patterns differently than the purely physical tasks.
That's fascinating. It's the literal science behind why, if you hurt yourself, doing a crossword puzzle or distracting yourself with a video game might actually help more than just staring at the wall.
Precisely. The cognitive load competes for bandwidth, but pure motor tasks relying on touch. The pain destroys your ability to do them smoothly.
Okay, so we've established that we can measure pain objectively. We don't need to ask 1 to 10. We can look at the chaos in the heart and the micro jitters in the eyes. That alone is a massive medical breakthrough.
It really is. It's basically the holy grail of objective pain measurement.
But there was a segment in the Intech open source that honestly stopped me cold. It takes us from cool science experiment to a heartbreaking reality check. It's about autism spectrum disorder.
Yes, this is the most critical application of this research. The Intech Open chapter focused heavily on this profound finding.
So in the experiment, they had a baseline problem. They had a control group of neurotypical people, and they measured them at rest with no pain and then with the pain cuff. But they also looked at data from autistic participants.
Right. And here is the shocker. They looked at autistic individuals at rest. No blood pressure cuff. No induced pain, just sitting there effectively doing nothing.
Then what did they find?
They found that the physiological baseline of an autistic person at rest looked almost identical to the neurotypical person in pain.
Wait, let me repeat that just so it fully sinks in for the listener. An autistic person sitting calmly has the same biological stress signature as someone with a tourniquet crushing their arm.
That is exactly what the data suggests. The autistic participants at baseline showed the same sympathetic overdrive, that high fight-or-flight response, the erratic heart rhythm, the high LF power, that the neurotypical controls only showed when they were physically hurting from the cuff.
That completely reframes how we think about the autistic experience.
It implies that many autistic individuals may be living in a constant state of high physiological arousal. Their baseline is already at the ceiling. Their brakes, the vagal tone that calms the heart down, are compromised. It makes social engagement and emotional regulation physically difficult.
So when we see a child with autism who is nonverbal, and maybe they're acting out or they're having a meltdown because the lights are too bright or a tag in their shirt is scratching them,
we often call that behavior. We say they are being difficult or tantruming, but if you look at the biosignals, their nervous system is screaming. They are effectively in a state of chronic distress that looks biologically identical to being in physical pain.
and because their baseline is already so high, if they do get injured, say they have a real toothache or a stomach ache, how can they express that?
That's the communication gap the researchers highlight. Since current pain scales rely on verbal reporting, like saying, I feel a 6, we might be completely missing chronic distress in nonverbal populations. We are waiting for them to act in a way we recognize as pain, but their body is already maxed out.
This circles right back to that subjectivity problem from the beginning. If your normal is my torture, a pain scale of 1 to 10 isn't just useless, it's actually dangerous.
Exactly. And it's not just autism either. The study highlighted a specific case study of a participant who wasn't autistic but suffered from chronic pain in their daily life.
Ah, right. The chronic pain outlier.
Yes. When they put the pain cuff on this person, their readings didn't change much.
Because they were already there.
Exactly. Their heart rate variability showed high stress, high low-frequency power, even in the control condition. The cuff didn't change their readings much because their system was already at max capacity.
So what does that tell us about how we treat patients?
It tells us that a one-size-fits-all model for pain detection completely fails these people. If we just looked at the change in that participant's numbers, we would have said, oh, the cuff isn't hurting them, because the numbers didn't jump. But the reality was their system couldn't jump any higher.
So we need what the paper calls precision medicine.
We need individualized baselines. We can't compare you to the average, we have to compare you to you. We need to track a person's biosignals over time using wearable sensors to understand what their normal looks like so we can detect when it deviates.
And the amazing thing is the technology exists. The study used wearable sensors and webcams. These aren't giant MRI machines.
That's the exciting part. This is totally scalable. Imagine a world where a smartwatch or a simple camera in a room can track these micro movements and heart rhythms.
So in the future, a doctor wouldn't ask a nonverbal child or a dementia patient, does it hurt? They would look at a data stream that says, his nervous system noise is up 40%, without them having to say a single word.
Precisely. We move away from does it hurt to objectively measuring how much noise is in your nervous system. It removes the bias. It removes the need for language. It gives a voice to the body itself.
That is incredibly powerful. It changes the mission of medicine from just treating symptoms to actually listening to the physiology.
And honestly, it creates empathy. If we understand that someone isn't just acting out, but is physically experiencing a fight or flight response that they can't control, our response changes from discipline to care. We stop asking, why are you doing this? And start asking, what is hurting you?
That's the big takeaway for me. It's not just data, it's empathy. It allows us to see inside an experience that is otherwise locked away.
Absolutely. It bridges the gap between minds.
We've covered a lot today. We've gone from blood pressure cuffs to heart chaos to twitching eyes, and finally to the hidden struggles of neurodiverse brains.
It's a dense topic, but the implications are massive. It's really about making the invisible visible.
I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over on your own. We talked about how the autistic baseline looks like the neurotypical pain state.
Oh.
If that's true, if the biological signature of simply existing with autism looks the same as neurotypical physical pain, how much of what we dismiss as behavioral problems is actually just a human being trying to cope with a nervous system that is screaming for help?
That is the question we should all be asking.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Stay curious and listen to your body. It's talking louder than you think.